Across America, BP supports more than 275,000 jobs to keep energy flowing. Jobs like building grid-scale solar energy in Ohio and producing gas with fewer operational emissions in Texas. It's and, not or. See what doing both means for energy nationwide at bp.com/investing in America.
The stress and crowds of holiday shopping can put a damper on your holiday spirit, and you don't always find all the perfect gifts you're looking for. The Virginia Lottery's games make easy and tremendously fun gifts for all the adults in your life, even you. Spruce up your gift-giving game this holiday season with the Virginia Lottery. The Virginia Lottery's holiday scratchers are a gift any adult will love. Treat yourself to some winter wonderment and play the lottery's holiday online instant games from anywhere in Virginia. Visit valottery.com/holiday. Please gift responsibly. Lottery games are not for minors. Have you heard? You can listen to your gripping investigations ad-free. Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app or visit amazon.com/truecrime ad-free. That's amazon.com/truecrime ad-free. And catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Content warning, this episode contains discussion of the murder of 2 girls. Some of these questions get into pretty graphic areas, so just use your discretion when listening. So recently, there were a couple of important filings from the defense in the case against Richard M. Allen, who is, of course, accused of murder in the case of the double homicide of Liberty German and Abigail Williams in Delphi in 2017. The defense's filing did a few things. It outlined their scenario of the case, which involved a far-flung Odinist conspiracy. And it also raised some troubling questions about mistakes law enforcement may have made in the investigation. So naturally, a lot of people have a lot of questions about these documents, what they mean for the investigation going forward. We recently put out on our Facebook group a chance to ask questions. We got some questions via email as well. So we will be answering a whole slew of those listener questions. Now, we got so many questions. I mean, people really came out for this. Like, we got like over 100 people. I was really impressed with everybody. I love how inquisitive our audience is. I love our audience. We're going to be dividing this up by topic, I think, just to make it a little bit more manageable. And in certain instances where everybody asks the same question, we will be boiling those down into, one kind of more concise question.
And we're not going to cover all of these 100 plus questions in one episode. So this is part 1 of us answering some of your questions.
My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases.
We're The Murder Sheet.
And this is The Delphi Murders, the Frank's Memorandum, Questions Part 1. In this first part, we'll be talking about some of the general questions that we got. These were questions where I couldn't really fit them in any of the other categories, so I just slopped them all together. Hannah wants to know, are there any cases similar to the Delphi case that you can think of where they've arrested a suspect and have a somewhat simple theory of what happened, but then the defense presents a seemingly outlandish theory and everyone is left wondering, what the heck? Yeah, that actually I think is probably decently common. And keep in mind that if we throw out any examples that we can think of, it's not that we're saying we think the defense is a weak case or that we're comparing the cases. It's just giving you a sense of like the simple explanation versus the more complex explanation, if that makes sense. The one that comes to mind is OJ, right? Domestic violence where you have a guy, lashing out at his ex-wife and a man that she's standing there with, versus what the OJ team said, which was everything else under the sun.
Didn't they say it was South American drug dealers?
Yeah, South American drug dealers.
I'm really reaching. It's been a long, long time since I read about that case.
Yeah, and I think one case we talk a lot about that we sort of think Delphi, unfortunately, is slouching toward is the JFK assassination, where nobody likes the lone gunman theory because it's boring and everyone wants it to be a big conspiracy. Even though the evidence tends to point to a lone gunman.
Let me ask you kind of a similar question. Are you aware off the top of your head of any case where two young people were killed by a cult?
No.
A cult that then stopped killing?
The only case that remotely involves a cult, certainly involves a cult, I'm not familiar. Let me look it up. So in 1989, this is an awful story, a University of Texas at Austin student named Mark James Kilroy, he went to Mexico just for spring break fun. He was murdered after being abducted by a cult, taken to a ranch, and sacrificed after being tortured. It's a horrible case. And that was indeed a cult. The cult was led by a man named Adolfo Constanzo. And it was just kind of this insane occult gang. They were doing drugs, they were doing cult stuff. And again, that was in Mexico. So Mexico, the country, not Mexico, Indiana, for everybody who's been following our coverage of Delphi. Cults absolutely do stuff, and there's religious cults. I'm sure we could find some murders that involve religious sacrifice. I would tend to argue that that's a relatively rare type of murder. It's sort of like serial killers. Everybody hears a lot about serial killers. They're comparatively rare in real life. So, I don't know. I think it's kind of like one of those very unique, interesting crimes. So, now, Janine wants to know, considering all we just learned from these motions, it doesn't sound very likely that the girls were shot. So why is a bullet casing even relevant?
Yeah, there's so much in this case that can be confusing. So we know that Bridge Guy had a gun. And how do we know that? Because there were things the girls said on the video which indicated the presence of a gun. Now, the girls were not shot, but there was a gun on the scene. He did not fire the gun at them. At some point, according to prosecutors, he cycled a bullet through his weapon. And that bullet dropped and was left at the crime scene. And the prosecution says there are markings on that bullet which link it very clearly to a weapon owned by Richard Allen. So that's why it is important in this case. Yeah.
It ties Richard Allen to the scene, and therefore, actually part of the Franks motion is to get the search warrant thrown out, which would throw out the gun, which would essentially destroy the only bit of evidence that we're aware of tying him to the scene.
And you could also make an argument. I don't know if it's an argument necessarily that Judge Gohl would buy, but you could make the argument that Richard Allen would not have made his confessions if not for the search warrant. Because it was the search warrant that led to him being arrested. And if the search warrant is bad, then you could argue that the confessions were fruit of the poisonous tree.
So all the odinous stuff aside, the important aspect of the Franks Memorandum is it calls into question witness statements and the handling of the PCA, which, if that turns out to be correct and results in the search warrant being thrown out, that would have some pretty massive ramifications for the case against Richard Allen. Caitlin wants to know, is there any way a vehicle could have been under the bridge that no one witnessed? No. I mean, well, the bridge is not It's an old railroad trestle bridge, and the creek is under it, so it's not like a traditional bridge that people like driving over. I'm not sure if that's what you meant with your question. This question continues. There seems to be so many questions regarding the evidence where answers might exist, but they won't be released to the public. DNA, fingerprints, footprints, phone locations, perpetrator being right or left-handed, additional interviews, etc. A lot of that stuff will probably come out in trial. Not all of it necessarily, but a decent amount. At least the stuff that, points to or away from Richard Allen, because defense and prosecutor will be, going in there. If you mean the bridge, not the Monon High Bridge, but the Freedom Bridge, then we can't really answer that question because we're not privy to what all cameras were used to kind of document what cars were in the area at the time. And therefore, we don't know if there's like an area where people could have driven where they would have not been picked up. So that's a lot of these questions are great questions, but we have no way of answering them because we just don't know. Because we definitely pride ourselves on trying to get a lot of information in this case, but we have far from everything. And so it's a limited worldview that you're getting from us. Rochelle, Danny, and Leslie all had some similar questions. And Leslie was asking for it from the angle of like, is it even possible based on the timeline that one man could have committed these murders? Whereas Rochelle and Danny were taking more of the tact of like, I feel like one person could definitely commit this crime in the time frame. And Rochelle actually identified the Idaho case against Brian Koberger, who is of course innocent until proven guilty, but is also accused of killing multiple people in a pretty short time frame. And so people are talking about, wouldn't it be easier for one guy to just do this quickly and then, not have multiple people to deal with, people keeping secrets? I guess we tend to be like, we'd have to see. It's when Kevin read it, the timeline of the murders of these girls, he felt like that's a lot for one person to do. When I read it, I felt like, yeah, somebody could do that. So I think it just kind of hits people different. Without us having more information, I don't feel like we can really say. The defense obviously has a motive to try to make it seem ridiculous that one person could do it, whereas the prosecution has a motive to make it be like, of course one guy could do this all. So, So
this is something that's going to be argued about a lot at trial.
And like, I can imagine one person asked a great question, and this was actually Leslie again. Do you think that the defense or a journalist will do an actual time test to see if it's physically possible to perform all the actions that the evidence suggests was done in the time frame that the prosecution believes the crimes were committed within? It would be interesting for us to try that, but I feel like there's so many gaps in our information that I don't feel like we could do an accurate one. And I wouldn't want to do something half-ass it, to be blunt, and then get it wrong and be like, of course you can do it when there's stuff we're not considering, or of course you couldn't do it when maybe there's elements that we're just not taking into consideration.
But I'm sure someone will try.
I think the defense, I think that would make sense for them to do it. They have all that information through discovery, prosecution, perhaps, law enforcement, trying it out themselves. I think that would make a lot of sense and could clear some things up. But Aaron asked us, what do you think of the Court TV claim from an author who followed our appearance last night that it is two different people speaking on the Down the Hill recording? I don't take that person seriously at all. And yeah, I don't believe we're not going to.
You're being blunt.
I'm being very blunt. I have COVID. I don't care. That is not somebody. There's people we disagree with that I absolutely respect and hear them out when they have something that I don't necessarily agree with. And then there's people who just have a history of saying whatever. And this case is enough of that. I don't care to even get that much into it.
Fair enough.
Jenny asks, what about Occam's razor? The simplest solution is usually what's true. How could so many white men conspire to kill two white girls and stay quiet about it? And the reason Jenny is mentioning the ethnicity of everybody is because, of course, the Odinists have been linked by the defense to white supremacy. It's the argument of white supremacists killing little white girls. What's up with that? Yes. Occam's razor is something that we find pretty helpful. It's kind of a cliche in true crime. Sometimes I think it gets misused. Sometimes the evidence points to something more complicated than what Occam's razor calls for. That being said, I think you just ultimately have to go where the evidence is. And we haven't even gotten back a response from prosecution at this point. So yeah, I'm not willing to throw anything out, but also not really willing to count anything in too stringently at this point.
I really hope the prosecution makes a very substantive response to this filing soon. And I hope they make that response available to the public.
Yes. But Jenny, I commend you for bringing up Occam's razor. I think that's something that a lot of people would really benefit from thinking about. Is it the crazy, most wild explanation or in the most interesting explanation? Is it a boring explanation? We tend to favor the boring, but I think it's also important to remain open to the interesting if the evidence points that way.
I think the next question alludes to an interesting possibility.
Yes. Amy,
Speaking of interesting, unfortunately, horrifying but interesting,
Amy asks, could this crime have been a snuff film? We don't know. There's nothing that
There have been a lot of rumors to that effect, but there have been all sorts of rumors in this case from the beginning. And any of us who have followed the case for a long time recognize that most of the rumors we hear about this case turn out to be false.
Yeah. And so, that's a question, we can't answer that. I mean, if we had knowledge that there was, video equipment found in the area or, the indents from a tripod, then okay. But we don't have any evidence, so we can't know. And certainly nobody's made that argument in any official channels according, from the defense or from the prosecution. Hannah asks, was the entire Snapchat video released to the public? I thought they said they had more video evidence, but they couldn't release it. My understanding is that the whole video has not been released.
Yes, it's about 43 seconds, and only, 2 or 3 seconds have been released?
That's my understanding. So, no.
At the Murder Sheet, we spend so much time digging into crime stories that sometimes it's difficult to find the time to plan out and cook elaborate, nutritious meals. That's why we are so excited about our sponsor, Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal delivery service. Our sponsors make this podcast possible. So if you go to factormeals.com/imsheet and use our special code imsheet, you're not just getting half off this high-quality meal plan. You're supporting us too.
So I'm obsessed with Factor. I had their creamed corn chicken and their tomato basil chicken risotto recently. Both were delicious. That risotto in particular was amazing. Plus, the whole process was a breeze. All I had to do was pop the meal into the microwave. The food was tasty and flavorful, which is no surprise given that each recipe is specifically crafted by chefs and approved by dietitians.
Having Factor during the hectic holiday season has been a boon, especially with us pumping out so many episodes. Head to factormeals.com/imsheet and use code imsheet to get 50% off. That's code imsheet at factormeals.com/imsheet to get 50% off.
Imagine all your audio entertainment available in just one place. That's what the Audible app is all about. With Audible, you can always find the best of what you love or discover something new. Audible has an incredible selection of mystery and thriller titles and originals, like Something Ain't Right by Roger Stringer and Zachary Stringer, The Space Within by Greg O'Connor and Josh Fagan, and the Audible original Moriarty. Membership includes access to Audible originals, podcasts, and tons of audiobooks that you can download or stream as much as you want. And as an Audible member, you can choose one title per month from an ever-growing catalog of titles to keep. The Audible app makes it easy to listen anytime, anywhere. Whether you're traveling, working out, doing chores, wherever your day takes you. New members can try Audible now free for 30 days. Visit audible.com/thrill or text thrill to 500-500. That's audible.com/thrill or text thrill to 500-500 to try Audible free for 30 days.
Sometimes during Christmas, something magical happens.
Hey, Cricket customers. The Max with Ads plan is included with the Cricket $60 unlimited plan at no additional cost. And this holiday season, Max is the one to watch when you're feeling festive.
Son of a nutcracker!
Cozy up to all the holiday classics, like Elf, 8-Bit Christmas, and the Harry Potter 8-film collection. Just log in with your Cricket username and password to experience Max on all your favorite devices. Phone plan streams and standard definition. Programming subject to change. Fees, terms, and restrictions apply. See cricketwireless.com for details.
All right. So these next batch of questions all have to sort of do with the crime scene. And I mean specifically the crime scene where Libby and Abby were found murdered, and sort of the events surrounding the discovery of their bodies, when people were searching for them. These questions are all in that vein. So first thing, Lily and Ty wanted to know, how accurate is the description of the crime scene from the defense? We don't know. And the reason is we have not seen any crime scene photos. We've not seen anything like that. And we've not heard anything for or against what they've put out there.
I would assume, and it's just an assumption, but I would assume it's relatively accurate because this description of the crime scene is prepared by people who've seen the crime scene photos, and it is being written for an audience, namely Judge Gull and Prosecutor McClelland, who have also seen the crime scene photos.
And the crime scene photos are included as exhibits, as to go along with this. Now the public's not seeing those, but the prosecutor and Judge Gull are. So if it was totally different, then that would be a pretty dumb move by defense, because then the judge would see that and say the photos show something completely different. What are you talking about? And confusion would reign. They have really no reason to misrepresent that. Now, that being said, I think that ultimately we're going to see two interpretations of the crime scene arise. Two people can look at two murdered bodies covered in sticks. One group can see these look like Odinist ruins. The branches are formed in such a way where the killer's trying to spell out a message, and perhaps the other side sees somebody's trying to conceal the bodies, or somebody is just doing something bizarre because they have a disturbed mind. And the Odinist lens is from the defense. I think this is one of the brilliant things about having the Odinist theory and putting it out there in this way, is that I think the defense has shifted the needle to the point that a lot of people who are asking us questions are completely accepting the fact that, yes, these must be Odinist ruins, because they're asking us questions like, could Richard Allen have been an Odinist, and that's why he put the ruins that way? And I think that's kind of interesting that they have seized the narrative to the point that people are just immediately believing that the branches on top of these girls are formed to be Odinist ruins just because the defense has spelled it out that way, and it's very compelling for a lot of people.
The defense are very savvy when it comes to media communications.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So I think a lot of people have just accepted that it's Odinist. I think the prosecution is probably going to say it's not. These are not ruins. They're just branches. But I think how we're going to see that play out over time, I don't know.
And I would imagine, too, the prosecution would say, we take every possibility seriously. The fact that we had officers working this lead and preparing reports on it show that we took it seriously and ran it down, and we just didn't find enough there to make an arrest.
Haley asks, how could this narrative the defense is claiming fit into what we already know are solid facts? For instance, the Patty German family, was out on the trails for roughly 2 hours before calling the police. That would mean that a group of bloody people would have snuck past every single one of them and also managed to go unnoticed while finishing up the murders in the woods. It just doesn't make sense. Haley, that's a fair point. The more people we put into the crime scene, the more complicated it gets, and the more people you have running around the woods, which makes sense from a controlling two victims standpoint, but not from a getting away clean standpoint. I know there's been lots of discussion about maybe witness sightings point to seeing more than one guy. Maybe they all look different, or maybe witness sightings are fallible. I don't know. It raises some good questions, but I don't know. I guess there's always a possibility that people are stealthy. Naomi asked, flannel shirt guy who turned out to be a community guide told Libby's father he heard a couple arguing. Was this ever confirmed? Yeah, our understanding is that the arguing couple was identified.
Yeah, and I believe the male in that couple was a suspect in some
online circles, not in official capacity. But, a lot of people have speculated that argument was really between the girls and the killer, but our understanding was there was a couple arguing there that day, so we're inclined to believe that was the case there. So Jacqueline, Michelle, Suzanne, and Barbara all had questions about DNA. In recent years, DNA has emerged as a very important method of solving crimes. Delphi languished for about 5 years before any sort of arrest. That always indicated to me that there was not usable DNA, that there was not enough DNA to make a profile to say this one person was at the scene and therefore did it. If they had a workable profile, they could use genetic genealogy to hone in on their relatives and therefore hone in on them. Jacqueline asked specifically, the family said the cops told them there was DNA in the case. Was this ever confirmed? Michelle asked, I wonder if the forensic vacuum, the HVAC, could be used on some of the items. I think they've probably thought of that, to be honest. And as for, I think it's possible there's DNA. I just don't think it was usable. Suzanne had mentioned reading that there was vomit at the scene. We've never heard that. Have they taken DNA from Richard Allen yet? Probably, I would imagine, if he's imprisoned. I don't know. But I mean, if there's no workable DNA at the scene, which again is what I believe, I don't have that confirmed, but that is what I strongly believe, then it doesn't matter if they have his DNA because there's nothing to compare it to. Also, is it too late to get any DNA from those sticks? I don't know. Probably.
Yeah, I would imagine if there was vomit at the crime scene, they could have tested that for DNA. And if there was vomit at the crime scene and it did not have DNA matching the girls or Richard Allen, I imagine the defense would have made a huge deal about that.
Yeah, that's the thing. If there's DNA at the scene that is not matching Richard Allen, that is, seems to be directly involved in the crime scene, then that would be pretty problematic. Trisha, Kelly, and Jackie all asked about the water, namely Deer Creek, which of course is the creek that flows under the Monon High Bridge, and the girls seemingly were forced to cross through in order to get to the crime scene. Trisha asked, do you think the reason they went across the creek is because the girls tried to make a break for it? Can't imagine the killer planning to go through the water. Kelly asked, is there evidence the girls crossed the river on foot? Could they have gone over in a canoe or small boat? So we don't have any way of answering either of these, though. Any answer that we would give would be highly speculative. Ultimately, it will be up to the defense and the prosecution to map out the killings and give their own version of what they feel happened. We don't feel comfortable just painting in the blanks here because there's, again, so much we don't know. Evangeline, Teresa, and Debbie all asked about the clothes. Namely, how did Abby's shirt not get dirty if she crossed the creek and climbed the bank while wearing it? What's the significance of putting Libby's clothes on Abby? Is there any evidence the girls wore their clothes when crossing the water? It sounds like there was a bit in the Frank's memorandum about Abby's shirt not being dirty. So that's interesting. I don't know.
Yeah, it suggests the possibility that she was undressed, perhaps, at the time she was murdered.
I suppose, yeah. But I don't know how we interpret any of this for you guys because, a lot of the questions that people want to know about have to do with the crime scene. And I get that because ultimately that can tell us what happened to these girls, and that's what we all want to know. But we're not going to be just going off the cuff speculating because I think that's led to a lot of really dumb takes in this case, and I don't want to be contributing to that because it's already a mountain. It's a mountain range. It's the freaking Rockies. And if we can just sound dumb and say we don't know a lot, then I feel a lot more comfortable with that than just with oh yes, this must mean that, they did this and having that be wrong. We don't want to mislead you guys. We think your time is too valuable. And some of these questions are really good ones. So we want to read them out because maybe they make people think about it, but we don't want to contribute to anything where we're just acting like we know because we have a hunch. Lauren, Betsy, Sherry, and Kristen asked, apparently there's been some statements from Barbara McDonald, a reporter who was previously with HLN. She said the police didn't take the sticks or branches from the crime scene as evidence until weeks later. I think, Kevin, you confirmed that she said something like that on Twitter.
Yes.
Or X, whatever.
Yeah. And the question is, can we confirm this? We have not been able to confirm that with our own reporting. So.
Yeah, but we're not going to, like, call it into question either. So it's, I mean.
Barbara McDonald has pretty good sources.
So we'll let you know if we find a similar thing. If they didn't properly collect evidence of the crime scene, that's obviously concerning.
She's been on the case for a long time and has very good sources.
So that's something to look into for sure. Angie asks, what are your thoughts on the both organized and disorganized aspects of the crime scene, posing being organized and time taken, but then disorganized regarding Libby's phone being found beneath her body? If she was moved as stated in the memorandum, why did the perp leave the phone behind, especially if she'd been disrobed? Angie, these are good questions, but I think sometimes a lot is put on the like disorganized versus organized serial killer dichotomy, and I don't really know how relevant that is in this situation, just given that we don't know if the perpetrator was a serial killer or if this was a one-off. I know a lot of people prefer it to be a serial killer because then that explains the brutality and the strangeness of it. But if there's no evidence of whoever killed these girls having killed before, whether you believe that's Rick Allen or the Odinist cult, then I don't know if we can be putting sort of the serial killer lens of disorganized versus organized. What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, I agree. It's just hard to know.
Crystal and Cindy had a question about, is there speculation the girls might have been stabbed in the creek, which would explain the lack of bloody crime scene? I mean, there's speculation about virtually everything, so I can imagine that there's speculation about that. Is that true? We don't know. Janine asked if the crime scene indicated the bodies had been moved and there was never a large bloody area discovered, wouldn't that indicate that they had been moved from an indoor location? If so, where? Well, that's making a lot of leaps, I think, so let's just reverse. I believe in the Frank's memorandum, the defense indicated that the crime scene evidence pointed to Libby being killed under some sort of tree, right?
Yes.
So it seems like there's a sense of where Libby was killed at the very least. So if the defense is saying, here's where Libby was killed, then it seems like at the very least she was not killed indoors. So I don't know. I think one thing people don't really realize is that our understanding is that while searches were called off officially at midnight on February 13th or going into February 14th, people were out there all night. People were out there for hours. Those were not official searches, but they were still going on. So the risk of moving these girls that way just seems completely at odds with the theory about them being killed elsewhere and then brought back and posed.
Yeah, it's difficult to imagine how somebody could transport two dead bodies back to the crime scene while people were in the vicinity searching. It was only a handful of people.
Yeah, that's one of those things that I've always found incredibly far-fetched. And if it's far-fetched, then show me where the evidence is. And not just like speculation based on what we've heard so far, but like there should be evidence at the scene, you know, namely the lack of blood. But as we've said, Libby's blood is there. People have pointed out that there's not as much certainty about Abby. And I agree with that based on the language here, but we're not getting the full picture either. So Cindy asked, were there ligature marks on Abby indicating she was suspended? I believe there was some speculation about that in the defense memorandum. Not that we're aware of. That doesn't mean that they aren't, but ligature marks show up pretty well. So I would imagine that evidence would be there in the, autopsy report.
Yes, I would imagine so, especially since she would have had to have been suspended for quite some time.
Amy also cites Barbara McDonald, saying Barbara McDonald depicted the letter F on the tree and how it looks drastically different than what was described on page 41 of the memorandum. Defense indicated straight lines were painted in blood, using multiple trips to redip the finger or tool in blood. But the depiction or drawing Barbara showed on court TV looks like splatter or dots of blood. They can't both be true. Amy, that is correct. They can't both be true. And we don't know which one is true. So we don't want to call anybody
I think this
liar. And not.
I think this goes back to what we were saying earlier, where a lot of stuff depends on perception.
And that's why I think it's like crazy that people, and that's why I think it's really interesting that people kind of like change their entire opinion about everything based on like one memorandum. Because I think it's really important to take this memorandum and say, here are some pretty intense questions I have about what's going on here. But I think like immediately being like, I now accept that this was an Odinist sacrifice. That's interesting if people are jumping to that level of thinking here, because we've not heard back from the other side at this point.
And like I keep on saying, it's all about perception. The defense can look at something on a tree and think this was deliberately done in the shape of a rune. And Barbara McDonald or her sources can look at the same thing and say, no, that was just splatter. And so it would be difficult to determine which is more accurate.
Without seeing pictures ourselves.
Yes.
And I mean, it goes both ways, because I remember when Richard Allen was first arrested, a lot of people were talking about him like he was already guilty. You know, hey, here's the guy. This is Bridge Guide. He did it. And it's like, you know, he's innocent until proven guilty. Let's give him, you know, let's see what his defense attorneys have to say. So I feel like it's just the weather vane of Delphi opinion just swinging around randomly. And this is frankly why we're so reluctant to like go super opinionated on anything, because we could be wrong and we'd rather just deal with the facts and talk about the facts, talk about the different filings than, you know, be, you know, planting our flag on one side or the other and then, you know, having to go back around, because it's just so much can change. So much can change with one filing. And at the same time, one filing shouldn't necessarily change everything. I think it's just important to be open-minded while also very skeptical of all sides. You know, when someone's arrested, that does not make them guilty. At the same time, you know, when alternate suspects are brought out and tossed out there, that doesn't make them guilty either. Let's just see what happens. Amanda asks us, review the concepts of posing versus staging and how this might apply to the new crime scene details. We're not crime scene profilers or anything like that. So, I mean, again, I think asking us to weigh in depth about the crime scene, that's not our forte. We're here to report the news. If we are able to find somebody who we feel can speak to that, then we'll definitely have them on to talk about some of this. But I'm also very skeptical about a lot of criminal profiling, to be honest. Like, I know that's a hot take in true crime. Everybody loves the profiling, but I tend to kind of think there's a lot of guesswork involved in something like that. So I think that's not our forte as a podcast. Casey and Brian asked, was there mud at the crime scene? If so, is there footprints? We don't know if there's footprints. The Franks memorandum described the crime scene as having damp, dirty ground. So I don't know if that speaks to mud per se, but certainly a dampness in the area that, you know, could indicate muddiness. I don't know. Without seeing any photos, I can't say.
There's also the situation that we don't know how well the crime scene was preserved once searchers came and made the awful discovery of these two girls' bodies.
Carla asked what I felt was a very empathetic question. I really like this question. The description of the crime scene was shocking to hear about. Were Abby and Libby's families notified ahead of the release of the memorandum? I do hope they were made aware of the details in a controlled and supported environment ahead of time. My heart breaks once again for them. I don't know, unfortunately, but yes.
I suspect they were not given advance warning.
Yeah, I don't think they were.
Because I wouldn't expect for the defense team to be having interactions with the victims' families. I'm not even sure if the victims' families would want to have that sort of relationship with the defense attorneys.
It's very upsetting because we've been covering this for a while, and I just feel like, frankly, the whole experience has been incredibly jading, and, you know, just even within true crime, it seems like a certain level of just ridiculousness exists within the Delphi space. But at the heart of this is a story about two dead children who were denied the chance to grow up in the most brutal and disgusting fashion. And even though I've always heard about how horrible this crime scene was, reading about it in detail made me sick to my stomach. I was so like, oh God, I don't even know. It was just horrifying because it really puts you in the mindset of what they were going through in the end. And I feel for these people. This has been friggin', 6 years in hell for anybody who cared about these girls. And it's pretty graphic information, and this was always going to come out at some point. So I'm not saying that, oh, it was bad to include it. I'm not weighing in on that. I'm just saying that it was always going to come out in some sort of trial setting, but it's still, I can't even imagine what they're dealing with right now. Kelly asked in a similar vein, do you think any photos, albeit censored, obviously are going to end up being leaked? It sure feels like it. Kelly, nothing would surprise me anymore. Now, leaked implies that they be released improperly, in the sense that somebody with official capacity leaks them out to the media, and it's not like a situation like this where it's released and made public, right? So, I don't know. That would be a pretty flagrant violation of the gag order if they were leaked. Can you explain? I think a lot of people ask, we're going to cover in a future segment, a lot of people feel like, how was any of this even released under the gag order? And we're going to explain that. We're not going to do that now, but we're going to talk a little bit about like what's allowed and what's not. But what are your thoughts on that, Kevin? Things leaking at this point?
Well, of course, Prosecutor McClelland sought and received a protective order for the discovery, which basically means we have to keep this discovery as private as possible. So considering that, the defense team would likely face some sort of sanctions if they leaked it. And I also don't think it would be in their interest to leak it. With that said, I could imagine if somebody attends the trial hearings, maybe trying to discreetly snap a picture.
Oh, yeah, nothing would surprise me anymore.
I know Judge Gold doesn't allow phones, but so that, and then things could get out that way.
I hope it doesn't, but, it could always.
If we hear back from the prosecutor that, yes, this description of with the sticks and stuff is accurate, then we don't need to see pictures because we have an agreed upon description of what it looked like.
But, I doubt the prosecution's going to be like, yes, we also thought it was ruins. They're going to say somebody covered them up with branches. That's not ruins. So there's going to be like somewhat of a need for the jury to see for themselves. Does this look like somebody almost fashioned these branches in a way that was purposeful and meant to send a message, or like the defense is saying, or do they agree with the prosecution? It looks like someone piled up a bunch of sticks.
Yeah, the jury has to see.
Brian asked, in the short video of the menacing guy on the bridge, has anyone done a forensic analysis of his height and dimensions of that suspect based on the video? Brian, this is something people have been just trying to do on YouTube for years. We are not mathematicians. We're not scientists. We're not video people. We have no ability to assess the credibility of any of the claims that have been made. So we're not going to do that. But other people certainly have been trying to do it. And God bless them. Maybe they're right. Maybe they're wrong. I don't know. That's just in the realm of, stuff that we're sure the police and defense, if they can do that, will be bringing their own experts. Sandy asked, it's mentioned that some of the branches were cut versus torn from a tree. Will they be compared to the trees near the crime scene to determine if they came from there or another area? If it's a cut branch, cut with a tool, that could still be visible today on a tree that was the source. Great question, Sandy. We don't know, but it's worth noting that. TJ asked a question about the timeline. If the murderer or others were involved, could they have time to kill, get these sticks, branches, and make a perfectly cut edge on one of them, undress, dress, and place bodies? Or would those items have had to be already been there prior to the murder, making this more of a premeditated event? And TJ points out that, the abduction happens around 2:13, and then there's a 3:57 sighting from the muddy and bloody witness on the side of the road. So could this have all happened at once? We talked a bit about this earlier, and just to come full circle, we don't know. I think some experimentation would be necessary, and we don't feel comfortable doing that because we don't have all the facts. And we're not about to be running around the woods of Delphi at this time, because that would just, that would be kind of ridiculous.
But yeah, if there's branches that have been cut with a saw or some other device, it does raise the possibility of premeditation.
I guess the other possibility is he has a saw, because he's not carrying the saw, is he? Or maybe he is. I don't know. It raises all sorts of questions.
He could have left the saw at the crime scene
and come back.
Knowing that I'm putting the saw here, I'm going to go get my victims.
Yeah, and then come back, kill them, then saw, or something like that. And TJ also says prayers and sympathy go out to the family and anybody affected by this tragedy.
This is a good time to stop, and we'll come back later and answer the rest of the questions. Thank you so much for these wonderful questions.
Absolutely. You guys are awesome.
Tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for the Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.